and we'll make sure that you're edited out of it. But I've just pressed record now. Normally what we do is we also get everyone to go around and introduce themselves and tell us a bit about themselves. But there's so many people on today's call that what I'm going to do is just shout out the name of the organisations that are represented here, quite a few tonight. And if you just want to give a wave and say hi, then we'll do that. So in no particular order this evening, just welcome to Sanitarium, the crew from Sanitarium, if you want to give a wave.
Hi everyone.
Zero.
Hello.
Lion. We've got some of the Lion crew here tonight. AIG. Hi AIG. Fuji Xerox. Kevin, Peter's there as well. Good food. I think they're coming a little bit later. Milford Asset Management.
Hi, waving virtually, we don't do video.
Yeah, fair enough. And then SAP is going to be a little bit late, I think. Hudson, quite a few.
Hi.
Hey
No
everyone.
Video. Crockers, Rothbury, and THL. So thank you, all of you. You have been supporters of ours in one way or another, and we've got a few new faces tonight. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Before I introduce Andrew, our incredible speaker for tonight, I'll hand over to Jenny, our CEO at Grand Dingle Foundation, who's going to speak for a couple of minutes.
Hello everybody. For those of you that met my large oversized puppy, she's now chewing the front doormat, but she's gainfully occupied. So hopefully during this call she'll be busy. But hey, I just want to say thank you so much for all jumping on and joining us in this. And I'm just so grateful to Charlotte and Andrew also for talking about this topic. I think it's going to be brilliant, and it's something that I know if you'd asked me 5 weeks ago if our team could ever all work from home and produce the sort of creativity and innovation that I've seen them do, I just wouldn't have thought it was possible. So I just think it opens up brilliant new horizons for all of us. But why we are here as an organisation is that I guess a few years ago we came down to a sort of a line in a way, is that we help kids overcome obstacles. We do it across, we've got 6 different programs now actually, which range from our Mind, our youth offender program, right through to our primary school program, Kiwi Can. So most of you are involved in one shape or form of our program, so you'll know them. So we deliver those to 27,000 kids across the country. And actually usually it's pretty much face to face. So about 6 weeks ago we had to completely turn that on its head. And I'm really proud of our team that they have actually managed to completely turn our delivery around so that it's online at the moment. In fact, last week we became an essential service at level 4 as well. So from this week onwards, we can actually do a dual delivery on some of our programs. That's another story, but been fascinating. So as we go forward into hopefully the sort of the rebuild that we're going to go into, it's the impact on our young lives, because it's our kids' future that we're really rebuilding or building. So I think as an essential service, we become even more important in terms of some of the messaging that we're delivering. So I'm just so excited for tonight in terms of getting some of that insight into what things could look like and debating it with all of you. So thank you again. And Claire, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Jenny. Agree with you. We've had amazing amounts of innovation coming out of our team, but run by a very innovative leader that is Jenny. So without further ado, real pleasure to introduce you to Andrew Brands and potentially Charlotte Lockhart, who may come in the back. Is there. Andrew is the founder of the 4-day week that was implemented at Perpetual Guardian, which I think he's going to talk a bit about tonight. And he's also going to share where to from here. How can we come out of this better and stronger, and what does it mean for the future of work and our young people? So particularly pertinent to our organisation and really our country. So Andrew, I'm handing over the reins to you. Go for it.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Jenny. Kia ora, everybody. Look, as Claire said, I can talk a little bit about the 4-day week, but I want to really say about what does that mean. Now, the 4-day week, when we introduced it, which is now, over 2 years ago, was really very simple. It was about challenging people in our organization to think about how they would do things differently if they had the prize of having a day off a week. And so we created this thing, the 100-80-100 rule, 100% pay, 80% of the time, provided we got 100% of the productivity. And when I first introduced this, I said to my leadership team when we were going to introduce it, I said, well, I'm going to do this. And they said, well, we're going to do it. And I said, I have absolutely no idea. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the staff. Now, if you look at the world that we found ourselves in over the last, 4 to 6 weeks, we all had business continuity plans. We'd all gone and tested how our computer systems would work if we had a crisis. But what we hadn't done is we hadn't tested how our people would work. And now what's happened, we have implemented in a very short period of time a whole new way of working. And if you think about it, that's not something that's come from top down. What's actually happened is the challenge has been posted to our people, and they have had to work their way through this. They have had to think about how they were going to do things differently so organizations could continue to thrive. And I'm minded of a commentary I read this morning from the chief executive of Barclays Bank in the UK, who said that he is now debating whether, in fact, Barclays' 70,000 people will ever go back into working in big offices again. Because much to his surprise, he found that you could work and run a major financial institution with everybody working from home. Now, I guarantee that if each of us as leaders had posed that question 6 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, an awful lot of leaders in the country, a lot of leaders around the world would have said, actually, we're really worried about this. We're really very concerned that actually what we're going to see is we're going to see our organizations fail to operate. And yet, I don't know what your experience is, but I know what our experience is in fact probably productivity, if anything else, has actually improved. And what I mean by that is it's not the overall amount of productivity that you see in your company. That is often driven by the level of economic activity that's out there in the market. And inevitably, if sales are down because purchases are down, your activity is dropping. But if you actually look through that and you look to how long it takes somebody to do something, what are they producing in a week? That when you look at that, you'll start to see that in fact productivity per person, the time it takes to do things, has probably improved as a consequence of people working from home. In fact, the biggest problem that most, I think, employers are now seeing is how you stop people working when they're working from home. Because when you go to work and when you come from work, they are clear divisions in a day. But now, you've just saved yourself your hours commute to and from the office. And actually, there is no firm division. So actually, we are finding in our business, and I'm sure you're finding it as well, that people's workday is expanding to fill the time that otherwise they would be commuting. And sure, they're having to deal with the interruptions that occur as a consequence of a large dog, small children, whatever else you've got floating around. But in reality, we have those disruptions when we're in the office. And, some of you will have heard me say that, statistically, whenever you are working in an open plan office, which is in fact the greatest single invention ever devised for destroying productivity in an organization, you will find that you are interrupted statistically every 11 minutes, and it then takes you 22 minutes to then get back to full levels of productivity. So we've now got this incredible, amazing gift that we have been forced to rip up the way that we have been working give or take the odd interruption caused by war, for over 100 years. And that is the 9 to 5. That is the office-based culture. Now, we've been arguing in 4-day week for some time that actually the way we worked in the 21st century, the construct of the 9 to 5 days a week, was no longer fit for purpose. And the reason we were hesitant to move to a different model, I think, was 2 reasons. One was it was that most people didn't trust their staff. And I'm aware of a law firm here in New Zealand that requires its staff to have Zoom running the whole time so they can see that they're working. But most of us are now of the view probably that that is no longer an issue. So trust was one of the key issues. The second was about productivity. You know, how do I know what productivity is? Well, again, most of our companies have absolutely no idea what productivity per employee is. What we did do is we used the surrogate of time. If I knew when you arrived and I knew when you left, that broadly was the benchmark that I used to determine what I was getting out of an individual. And again, now we no longer have the arrival time and the departure time. So we're now learning how to gauge productivity without having the employee there in front of us and using the benchmark of time. We have to use the benchmark of output. Now, those 2 barriers, productivity, understanding productivity, and trust, were the major reasons why most companies, whenever we talk to them about the 4-day week, why most companies would go, well, actually, that won't work for me because I don't understand those issues. So when I look now at the opportunity that we have, it is that we have learned those lessons in the last 4 to 6 weeks. And suddenly you're starting to see company after company say, you know, maybe, just maybe, we're going to make this home working thing or flexible working far more part of our future. Now, again, some of you will have seen that Optus in Australia has come out and has said that they are not going back to work in offices and that they are going to retain home working post-COVID. A major call for a big telco. So that is a really huge opportunity. So what are we going to do about it? Because if you look at our world, we had the problem of the silent pandemic, and that was stress and mental health. You know, we look at the impact of COVID on our country, or even if you look at the impact of COVID around the world, its impact is a fraction of the impact of stress and mental health, where 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 of a workforce at any point in time. So that's not saying 1 in 4 of the population, that's at any point in time, because all of us go through this, suffering from stress or mental health issues. And we have to say, well, is that something that we want to do? That then flows into the impact on the health service. It flows into issues at home. It flows into things like domestic abuse. It flows into how you bring up your kids, what you can be a role model. How can you do that if in fact you've got high levels of stress, mental health? And that's not obviously just at a workforce level. That is also existing at all levels and all ages in society. Part of that is occasioned by how we work and the way in which our work is structured and the pressure of always being on. So now if we have a chance to reset that, would that be beneficial if people had more time to recharge their batteries, more time to connect with their families? All the things that they've had over the last 4 to 6 weeks. So if possible, we want to hang on to that. Now, we're lucky enough to be in social isolation on Waiheke Island, and I can see all the way across to the Waitakere's. And it's so clear most nights that I can see detail on the Waitakere's that I've never been able to see since we moved to the island, and that's because the pollution isn't there. And notwithstanding the best efforts of Auckland Transport to close every single road in the centre of Auckland, you can now drive in and out really easily, of course, because there's no cars on the road. And that flows not just into improving the climate, because broadly 30% of all emissions come from transportation. But that also means that if we could retain that in a post-COVID world, that of itself would probably put between 1.5% and 2% onto Auckland's GDP, because cars would be able to travel freely. If we are working from home, does that mean that the office is a construct of the past? Now, I've got, of the varying CEOs of the businesses that we own, are coming to me now and saying, actually, Andrew, yeah, we'd like to retain home working, or more to the point, we can't envisage ever going back into our offices anymore. Now, that's a challenge if you're a landlord, but it's a massive opportunity for the future construct of our cities if, in fact, we decide to convert our office blocks to housing, which is centrally located, which then in turn means we don't need the infrastructure that we are building to bring people in from suburbs ever further and further afield. And those close proximity to the city centre where people walk then will have a beneficial impact on the climate. So you can see, for me, I look at this and say this is a massive opportunity for us to rebuild something that is better coming out of COVID. And for me, it's actually a massive opportunity. However, the area where I am most concerned is about our young people. And I'm most concerned there because the danger that we have is, as we come out, you know, it's one thing to be very effective in dealing with the COVID crisis and, you know, putting another lockdown in, another lockdown, and making it tighter and tighter and tighter. That's a reactive strategy. We now have to ask our leaders to think about how they are going to lead us out of this. And the other day I came across a Churchill quote, which he said, "Those who can win a war well can rarely make a good peace. And those who could make a good peace would never have won the war." And we have that challenge in front of us, that we've been very good going in, but coming out is clearly going to need a whole pile of different skills. And one thing is easy when you go in, because if you're treating a patient going in, the patient in this case being the New Zealand economy, doctors are apolitical. And so to get their counsel and advice has been very easy. But coming out, unfortunately, it's about economics, it's about business. And that means that our politicians have then got to be confident enough to go very broad to find the people who can advise them as to how we might get out of this mess. And that's going to be a lot harder to do, because that's conceding that the skill set that exists is possibly not the skill set that we need to effectively come out. But the price of this, if we get this wrong, is enormous. So if you look at the Foundation for Young Australians' recent research, they do a fair amount in recent years. The generation under 25 has the highest levels of stress of almost every generation. The jobs that they do are largely temporary. 30% of all jobs in Australia that have been created in recent years are gig type jobs with no real investment in future skills, and they can be easily disintermediated by the onset of AI. A gig job has, no minimum wage protections, no superannuation, no holiday pay, no sick pay, and you only have to look at what's been happening in the United States, for example, around the gig workers that are being let go. So I think US unemployment has gone past 14 million in the matter of about 4 weeks. That generation has also been, I'm going to use the word conned, I don't mean that, but they have been encouraged to go to university to be qualified. They also therefore have student loans. The loans that they have got quite often will not be repaid because the jobs that they have are not high paying enough in order to pay for that education, or in an economic fashion, even though technically that loan doesn't need to be repaid. And then on top of that, they face the uncertainty that those jobs that they are likely to go into have the highest incidence of being threatened by the onset of things like AI. And if you look further, that this generation under 30 will have gone through 2 major economic recessions in the space of 10 years. So if you came out around the global financial crisis from university, you got smacked once, you're going to get hit again. And you only have to look at countries like, France, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Greece, as to what is happening to young people where you have mass levels of unemployment and disillusionment. That spins across the political spectrum. So I am very much of the view now that we have to do a major, major rethink as we come out of this. We have to start to say that actually the model that we have, this 5-day week model, has got to go. We have to get back to rebalancing the life so that people can do 2 things. One, they can recharge their batteries, but also they can engage with both their family and their society. And that might be by having the opportunity to continue their education, to reskill themselves, to take advantage of the opportunities that are likely to come down the track. Because if we don't create an environment like that, we face the challenge of long-term structural youth unemployment. After all, things like hospitality, which may well, international hospitality, may well be closed for 2 to 3 years, was an area in which it was relatively easy to get employment. And if that is gone, what replaces it? We have a threat to our agriculture of things like protein fermentation. And if you read some reports, they will suggest that dairy farming will cease to exist in New Zealand within 10 years. What do we do to replace that? And the only way we can replace that is if we have a highly skilled, highly flexible, motivated workforce that is capable of picking up the challenges that are going to be presented by the 21st century. And to do that, they need different skills than the ones that we have given them, the ones that they have paid for. And we're going to have to find a way to actually make that change. And that's where I see that as we come out of COVID, especially as businesses will inevitably start to cut hours and cut pay, and wearing some of the hats that I've got, we're already seeing those discussions of major employers going, look, I'd rather keep people in employment, but I'm going to look at for a 20% reduction in pay, 20% reduction in hours. Now, the salutary lesson here is Ireland. So Ireland, very, very similar in the context of having a very young workforce, a highly educated workforce. When it went into the global financial crisis, a lot of employees dropped hours and dropped pay. And as the economy recovered, they increased the hours but didn't increase the pay. So you had broadly a 20% downward movement in salaries, which a little bit has been clawed back, but not all of it was clawed back. That creates another series of problems. So where I think we have to start thinking about is that as we come out of this, especially if that exists, we actually need government to start to rethink what it does and how it does it. So for example, maybe instead of subsidizing the bulk of pay, that government comes out and says, look, we will subsidize that additional day, that day off a week, provided our organizations, our businesses, our companies go through new methods of improving their productivity. They go through an analysis of what that's like, and they get those steps to improve productivity, because we need to climb back up the league table of productivity. Government also says that actually, if we're going to do this, we need to provide subsidized, structured retraining in that day for our workforce, to build a workforce that is fit for purpose for the 21st century. Now, again, 6 weeks ago, we'd have turned around and said, well, we can't possibly do that. But we've just spent 3% of our GDP in the last 12 weeks in keeping people employed in businesses that in all likelihood may well still cease to exist in the next 12 weeks, or may well cease to exist in the next 3 to 4 years. We have to do something different. And that's where, you know, I will be calling for over the next few weeks for the government to be very bold, to actually reach across the political, the economic divide in this country, and to rethink how we build, let's call it a grand coalition of all interested parties to build the new economy that we actually need in New Zealand. Because if we don't, it's my fear that we will see structural problems, we will see political problems, and we will certainly see social problems. And they will be concentrated in the most vulnerable portions of our society, and that inevitably will be in the Maori, the Pacifica poor portions of the population. And that's just going to be something that's going to get worse and worse. Now, the good news is I think there's great grounds to be optimistic if we actually do that, because the rule book's been ripped up. The point of caution, of course, is that if we don't grasp this opportunity, businesses will default to the normal. And that is to business as usual, but probably leaner, fewer staff, possibly lower wages. And we'll have learned absolutely nothing from the last, 4 weeks. And we'll have taken nothing out of the COVID crisis. So that's, I think, broadly where we sit at the moment, but there is a route out. Now I've talked enough.
That was fantastic, Andrew. Thank you. So I can imagine there are many questions, and we've got a lot of people on the call today. So what we'll do is we have 25 minutes. We might just leave the last 5 minutes. We've got 2 speakers lined up for next week and the week after, and I just want to talk to you. And I think, Andrew, you'll be very interested in the next speaker because you may want to ask them a lot of questions. It's James Shaw, Associate Finance Minister. So, but lots of questions from the floor. If you have a question for Andrew, then could you, I don't know if you know, there's a little button at the bottom that's called reactions. Could you just press that, and there's a little hand button, put your hand up, and then I will field questions and try and take it in the order. So if anyone has a question. Really insightful, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Gosh, well, I've obviously stunned the audience.
Now, here we go. Jenny Styles.
I've got one, Andrew. The point you made, this one isn't so much of a major structural political question, which I'm sure we'll warm into, but it's more one of that definition between home and work. I personally have been really struggling with that. I live a bit out of the city, and I hadn't realised how much that drive, even though I always go on about the commute and the traffic, actually gives me that sense of division between work and home. And I'm finding that, and my team will tell you this, I'm on the email at all hours, trying not to, but they are as well. And I can't get that sense of being away from it. Have you got any tips? Have you come across?
Yeah, well, look, we were, Jenny, thank you for that. We were very lucky because we'd done the 4-day week. One of the things about the 4-day week is I had to go to all of my bosses, my senior leaders, and say, look, the policy says we're going to do 4-day week. Now, I know that you don't believe this, and I know that some of you will go home on your day off because you have to do it. If the leader doesn't do a 4-day week, nobody else is going to do it. So you're going to go home on your day off and you're going to work. So, but if you send an email on that day off, or you send an email in the evening, you are completely
Oh, Andrew, we've lost you. Is it me or is it Andrew? Oh no.
I think it's Andrew. At that very moment, the dog just grabbed my wallet. I had to grab it.
Oh, we've lost Andrew.
He might dial back in and realise, I'd say.
Okay, well, wait. Well, before Andrew, what we might do then is I'll talk about who we've got coming up in the next couple of weeks. So it would be good at the end. I can imagine Andrew will come back, but next week we have James Shaw, who is Associate Finance Minister, and obviously he's going to be talking about the economy and what it looks like for the future. But it'd be great to hear from those of you on the call. Is there anything specific that you would like to hear from the Finance Minister that we can kind of create?
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Oh, Andrew, you're back. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So the Wi-Fi just literally dropped.
I was having a moment hoping that wouldn't happen to me because I think the whole call would go if that happened.
Right. Okay. Sorry. So you want to pop it back?
True, yeah.
Go
for it.
Okay. So where was I up to? Where did I drop out?
We're just talking about the whole thing about the division between work and home.
Yeah. Okay. So the trick, the trick that we had was that because we had that, people learnt those divisions. They're able to put those boundaries around their working program. But you've got to do that. So you've actually got to physically be disciplined. You've got to actually sit there and put those boundaries in place. And otherwise, if you don't, it gets worse. So one of the challenges that people have is, quite rightly, you're seeing people work too long hours because you're always on. Now, that was entirely the thing we were trying to get away from when we implemented the 4-day week. So it is hard, but you've literally got to say, at this time, I'm turning this thing off, I'm throwing this thing away, and I'm going for my walk, and I'm going to be off air. And I'm not saying it's easy, but it's something you've got to do.
Thank you for that.
I don't know what I've got. Okay?
You're back, Andrew.
Yeah, I know, sorry.
I've actually got a question about, you talked about the fact that we're not preparing our young people for the world of today and tomorrow. Have you got any thoughts about what we can do to remedy that? I mean, I think as an organisation, what we do is we help young people with soft skills. But have you got any thoughts about what universities and schools could do to remedy that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that we're going to see a complete change in how people get educated. You know, increasingly in my business, the fact of whether you have a degree or not is irrelevant. What I actually know is you've got the appropriate skills. And often those skills are not necessarily academic skills, they're soft skills, their ability to problem solve. You know, most degrees are backward looking, not forward looking. And a lot of education is backward looking, not forward looking. So if I can't work out what the world's going to look like in 5 years' time, it's very difficult to justify teaching someone to spend 3 or 4 years studying backwards and building up big student loans, etc., etc. What would be better is far more education that goes along with you as you work. Again, that's one of the arguments I've got for the 4-day week. You've therefore got a day off a week that you can spend to continually educate yourself. That also isn't education that's occurring in the workplace, which in turn generally reduces productivity. So I think we have to rethink this. We actually have to say that actually was the strategy of getting all our young people to pile off to university, was that a good strategy? And I look in, I'm a Brit from background. Tony Blair had this massive, great, wonderful thing that he was going to do. You've got a whole pile of people who've gone to university over that period of time. And actually, in a large number of cases, statistically, they're economically worse off. And they never make it back up as a consequence of having made that decision. Whereas had they gone into education and training that was structured alongside work, they actually would have been better off. So I think, again, it's a massive rethink. Do we really need lots of massive campuses across the country? Most universities are really property developers. Or do we actually start to rethink how education is being delivered to our young people?
And if I can just sort of interject here, I think a lot of the way that the Dingle programs work and the skills and the education that you're giving the children in your various different programs help young people with the sorts of skills that they need to survive in life, and the critical thinking and the creative thinking and all that sort of thing. And so I think that what we're looking for is what are the programs post what you're doing that extend on the sort of things that you guys are doing.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks for that, Charlotte. Nicola had a question. I can't see people's hands going up. Okay, great. Nicola, go for it.
Hi. I've actually got 2 questions, but a bit different. So one, firstly on the 4-day week, and obviously your work and research and structure is based on 100% pay for those 4 days. But I guess what we're looking at now is a lot of companies looking to really sort of cut costs but retain staff. So I guess potentially going to 4 days on 80% pay. Is that something that you sort of looked at when when you were kind of setting this up and in your research to sort of look at different productivities in those different formats as to which you'd recommend companies going to, either sort of 80% or 100%?
Well, my initial concept was actually I don't pay you on time, I pay you on output. I mean, the thesis I had when I started this was to say that could I see changes in behavior that got rid of the busyness or the unproductive time? And if I got rid of that and people still produced the same amount, why would I cut their pay just because they spent less time producing it? And I always use the example of a consultant. So if you have 2 consultants doing the same piece of work, they produce it, it's the same quality, one takes an hour, one takes half an hour, why would you pay the guy who took an hour twice as much as the person who did it in half an hour? And equally, or why would you pay the person who did it in half the time, half the amount of the other person? It's about output. So we reject time as part of the determinant. What we're focusing on is productivity and what is produced. And therefore I pay for what you produce, not how long you take. And that then gives you the ability to, deal with things like, one of the real drivers, for example, in the difference in gender pay is because women quite often go and negotiate time off to do care responsibilities. And what we do is we then cut pay because of the time, but the output remains the same as somebody who works 5 days a week. That's just wrong. So we did reject it right from the start. The philosophy is about pay for output, and that's the thing that drives what you want to do. Now, post-COVID, inevitably, there are companies that will say, we're going to have to do that just to save money. That's fine. but you have to have a way back to paying full amounts of money. And so what we want to see is if companies do drop to 4 days pay, 4 days of time, that actually it would be great if you kept it at 4 days of time, but eventually got back to 5 days of pay. And that's something that we feel very strongly about. You shouldn't just be, forever reducing pay, reducing hours.
And we're doing quite a bit of work around what that looks like. And so I was going to sort of do this at the end of the webinar, but I will. So we're running a webinar with Phil O'Reilly, Craig Hudson from Xero, Murray Sherwin, the productivity commissioner, and a few others on the 21st of May. So if you want to sort of delve into that idea a bit more, feel free to email me on ceo@4dayweek.com. That's the number 4. And I'll make sure you get an invitation to come along to that, because I think this is a really important issue for New Zealand post-COVID is what that journey looks like.
Charlotte, what
Sorry, was that right? Was that enough for you?
Yeah, no,
So
good. And my question, was around, I guess, working from home, looking at this situation. I mean, for most of, well, I know for me, it's been great to sort of spend more time with the family, and it certainly, it definitely works in my circumstance, and I think that potentially for a lot of older people. But I guess for the younger sort of generations who build a lot of their social lives around work, and then I guess some of the more extroverted people amongst us who get their energy from being around people, like how that sort of differs and how you incorporate those into the post-COVID world if you're doing away with offices and group structures.
Yeah. Again, I think the 4-day week has a lesson here. But when we introduced the 4-day week, we didn't make it compulsory. So what works so in our company, when we talk about the 4-day week, what we really mean is reduced hours working. And so that means you can do a day off. You could do 2 half days off. You can come in late. You could go home early. You could work hours that are slightly outside the norm, or you can come in 5 days a week normal hours. We don't care, because it doesn't matter. You're not disadvantaged if you choose to come in and work 5 normal days. That's your choice. I'm not paying you for how long you sit there. I'm paying for what you produce. So if somebody will do it at home and take 4 days, they should be paid the same as the person who comes in for 5 days in the office and produces the same. Now, the same model therefore applies to businesses from the post-COVID world. If you decide that you want to keep flexibility, it's what works for you. Because if actually what you do is you say to everybody, you must do it this way, for every person that works for, there's a person it won't work for. And so what you're really trying to do is say, I will get the best out of my workforce if actually the working environment that they have is the one that best suits them. And so that's all you have to do. There will therefore be people who will. They do. We estimate in our business that we'll never get beyond 85% of the organization. And we're currently at about 76% of the organization on the 4-day week. Because in that 15% is a bunch of people who want to come to work for social reasons. And that's what they want to do. That's how their lives work. That's fine. If that's what works for them, you need to let them work that way.
Very interesting. Love it. Just being flexible. We've got another question from Kat. Kat, your question?
I think Nicola sort of actually just asked it. It was really around that. And I think from a personal perspective, I've found that not going into the office and not just having some of those bump conversations where it can spark kind of ideas and creativity and innovation when they're not necessarily even arranged meetings, but you sort of, you kind of overhear things or you make connections in terms of, I'll be sat next to a team, the ventures team, and I'll be like, that sounds really interesting. And I can think about that from a sustainability perspective. And I just don't get access or just don't, even though it's disruptive, and I do structure my week to have some work from home days so that I can get work done, I feel I'm missing the social connection, and I'm missing some of the creative sparks that sometimes happen incidentally in an office. And I suppose just around your comment in terms of creating spaces for everyone and being flexible. Kind of freaked me out to think about if my business came out and said we're not going to have an office. I think that would definitely make me feel like, oh, well, how am I going to connect with everybody in a social space?
Well, so I think you're always going to have, I mean, I think actually the office of the future may well be the reverse. You may work mostly from home and go to the office to socialize, you know, because you need to go and have those things. So the office of the future may well be a bit of meeting rooms, big cafe where you could interact, an enormous water cooler you can congregate around. But I'm going to, let me just throw a different thing at you. Here we are now having a glass of wine. And I think when we kicked off, there were 27 people sitting here from all different companies, different walks of life, different issues. Now, actually, this is just a giant water cooler, right? And for as many times as you might say, well, actually, I'm losing one lot of interaction and one lot of idea generation, I'm actually picking up a whole heap more. And yeah, of course, I'm missing going into the office a little bit myself, but I keep having meetings like this day after day from actually across the world as well as in New Zealand, talking and meeting to people that I never would have had the chance to talk to. And whereas, you know, there are people that you would have tried to arrange a meeting with and they'd have said, well, I'm in Wellington, or I'm in Sydney, or I'm in London. And to actually go and have that conversation face to face was a day or 2 days or God knows a week before to have it. Now I can actually quite legitimately say, actually, should we just have a Zoom call? And they go, yeah, sure, whatever. And so we're picking up a different type of water cooler. We're picking up a different type of interaction. And bizarrely, the people you're talking to in these things are not the usual suspects. They're not the people that maybe, and this is the challenge with companies, we recruit people who look like us, who think like us, who act like us. And therefore, by definition, often the solutions that we generate for our businesses and our organizations are homogenous. But on these calls, it's not like that. So the net result is you actually open yourself up possibly to more creativity, not less. Now, that's not to denigrate the need for human interaction, but I actually think we're gaining something through this as well as losing something.
I love that, a different type of water cooler. That is such a good imagery. Apologies everyone, I can't see the hands going up because I've got a different screen format because I'm trying to record Andrew right now. So if anyone have any questions, just please feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
I'll jump in again if no one else is talking. Not more a comment than a question, really. Just thinking about sort of in a new world where you have this increased flexibility and some people choosing to work from the office and some people from home. It's another element to diversity of your workforce that you really need to factor in. So if you have like a large number of extroverts that always sort of want to be at the office and then your introverts are at home, there's a different balance to the people that are regularly talking. Just sort of an interesting kind of change in dynamic that I guess, and there'll be potentially other cultural things you'll need to build into that as well. And it's certainly an interesting sort of shift in thinking about your entire workforce.
Well, that's right. But I think, isn't that the case normally in business anyway? So as we sit here now and, you know, Auckland itself will go beyond, will be less than 50% Pākehā with effect from, if it's not now, it will be next year. Now, that's in a period of 10 years, broadly-ish. So our world is changing already, right? The what's important to us as a country, or what's important to us as a city, how your business looks, it evolves and changes all the time. This is merely another change, another form of evolution. And the fact is we've just had a short, sharp shock of it. And therefore it's quite difficult to come to grips with where this might go. And I'm not saying, advocating for a second that, you know, every single business will say, right, that's it, you know, not going back, not going to do that ever again. I think the Optus call is, you know, frankly, quite a bold call. But I think inevitably the balance will change, and all you will do is you will evolve and change accordingly. I probably spend more time talking to people now than I have spent talking to people on a daily basis in probably the past 5 years, because I generally used to go into my office and do stuff and there were bits of paper to shove around. Now, actually, my life is about communication. It's about verbal communication. It's not about, you know, typing emails particularly anymore, which we all did. Actually, it's just as convenient to do a Zoom call. So I use a Zoom call. So in some ways, communication is improving, I think, as a consequence of this. And I think that's just part of the way in which business will broadly evolve going forward. And I think if we use the get the rest lessons from this, we take the good lessons from this, you know, this will be a watershed moment. We will have more time with our families. We will have more time with our communities. We will have more time to volunteer. We will rediscover all those wonderful things. How many of us are actually a little bit slimmer than we were when we started this process?
Or fatter.
I would like to think, despite Charlotte's best efforts, that I am slightly slimmer than I was. At least my belt appears to be.
Yeah.
You know, it may just be that I'm just yanking it tighter to make me feel better. But I think there are a lot of good things that come out of this that, you know, we have the chance to build on if we actually think about it correctly.
Yeah, I think that one of the interesting things we see around the world when we're talking about the 4-day week and we're having conversations about various forms of flexible working is that how much you back a program within an organisation can be very manager specific. So, and you will have all seen flexible working in organisations is very dependent upon whether the line manager thinks it's a good idea. So I think in leadership spaces, we have to be very clear not to get managers making the decision that they want to return to what suits them and forget to be looking at what will suit members of their team, and maintaining that flexibility so that we have all got the workplace that better suits the way we want to work and what suits our lifestyles, and not letting managers do what managers do. Inevitably.
And now, Claire, quietly confident that my clock says that we're down to the minutes that you need.
Yeah, we do have one really small question, I think, from Simon. Is it a small one, Simon?
Sure. Yeah, it is. Very brief, but more like a statement, really. I love Andrew's comment about university and overburdening people with debt and setting them up for a career with backward-looking skills, because I totally see that. I've been in the education sector, not in it anymore, but I really endorse that, going along and just adding things to your toolkit over time, so you can dip in, do a short course, put it into your toolkit, and then that takes you to the next thing that you're doing, or the next level of your job that you're doing, or the next project, and doing that project orientated continual skill building toolkit approach. I think that works really well. And if universities could grab all of that and then package enough of them up and then say, okay, now you've got a degree, but those skills or those packages would have to be developed with a forward thinking view, and so would change every year or be upgraded every year. That's how I see it going.
No, Simon, I absolutely agree. I mean, look, I have the most incredibly useful degree that you could possibly have in the world of finance and the law. I am an archaeologist.
Excellent.
Now, completely pointless degree, backward looking, like 1,000 years. So the reality is the skills that have enabled me to do the job that I did and have done and do are nothing to do with degree. They are all the soft skills that going to university or being, going through education taught me, not what I actually learned, which was singularly useless. But it was the other side of it. And I always look back. I had a chaplain the days when I was running the credit department at Macquarie Bank. My finest analyst for the most complex financial products was a fine arts graduate. And his brain was just wired an incredibly different way. But he was no mathematician. But if you wanted somebody to work out how those things worked, you used him, because it was the way his brain worked. And that's where we've got to get to.
Yeah.
Quite simply.
Bring back humanities and art.
STEM over STEAM.
Thank you so much, Andrew and Charlotte as well. Obviously, you come as a package and support us for many. So yeah, thank you so much. We have so many insights, a lot to. I've actually written about 5 pages of notes here from what you were saying and some incredible quotes. Really appreciate your time. What I might do as well is just grab Charlotte from you or Andrew, the speaking slot that you were talking about with Phil O'Reilly and Craig.
Yes. I'll email it to you, Claire, and then you can send it around.
We'll send it around to everybody that was on the call if you're interested. And I don't think we've got time to talk about it, but next week we have got James Shaw, who's Associate Finance Minister. So you were talking, Andrew, quite a bit about what we need to do to future-proof our country. So really encourage you guys to come think about the questions you might want to ask James. And then the following week, we are going to have David Bell, who is the Director of Business Growth from Xero. And he's got some incredible insights about companies who have really taken up the challenge of being innovative and different in this current situation, and how we can all learn from that. So we will send you all that information. Thank you everyone for coming on and engaging. And again, thank you, Andrew. Incredibly insightful. I think it's going to take me a while to digest that, and I'm sure it is a number of people as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Cheers, everybody.
And enjoy the rest of your wine that you have in your glass.
Thanks all. Thanks,
Yeah.
Amazing. Thanks, Andrew.